Tonight is going to be the last sermon before we actually get into the books themselves. We're going to be studying these minor prophets, and we need to understand they were written 800 years before Christ came, and so we need to look at the background and see really what they were talking about. Instead of just picking up a book and starting to read it and looking at it and a minute saying it really doesn't make sense, and it won't make sense unless we understand the background behind what this prophet is saying. So next week, we'll be turning to the book of Amos and looking at that book, but tonight we're going to finish the background of it. Now last week we stopped with this chart here. We spent a period of time talking about what was happening up in Israel, how that Jeroboam got those two golden calves and put them up there, and this is an actual picture of the place in Dan where he put that golden calf. Obviously, I've put the calf there. That's just something that I've taken out. But here it is. We have the high place, and that's the actual picture that he had there, the high place of where he had that golden calf standing. Now, as we look at that, we might say we've been studying about Jeroboam building his false religion in Israel. And we've seen that it has just been a terrible religion. It has just been something of where he has taken the children of Israel into sin, and it is a terrible situation. But now we're going to pick up our story tonight, and we're going to cover quite a lot more chapters in looking at this to kind of put it all together. So now, we're going to ask the question, meanwhile, while Jeroboam was building that false religion up in Israel, what was Rehoboam doing back down in Judah? Back down in the country where he should have been. Now remember, Rehoboam was the son of King Solomon, and he's ruling over Judah, where Jerusalem is located, and that is where God said his house is supposed to be. So we want now to look and see, all right, up in Israel, they have just been going wild with sin. And Jeroboam has built those two golden calves, and that's what they are involved in. Now then, let's go back down to Judah, and let's see what happened down here. So we turn to 1 Kings chapter 14 and verse 21. And we say, all right, what was Rehoboam doing down here? And Rehoboam, the son of Solomon, reigned in Judah. Rehoboam was 41 years old when he began to reign. He reigned 17 years, and so forth and so on. Now then, look in verse 22. And Judah did that which was evil in the sight of Jehovah, and they provoked him, that is, they provoked Jehovah to jealousy with their sins which they committed, above all that their fathers had done. So Rehoboam is now provoking Jehovah to jealousy because he's guiding the people down there. Well, what's he doing? What's he doing? Because Jeroboam has had these two golden calves up there, but it said in verse 23, for they also built them high places. Now keep in mind, these are things we've already studied. A high place is a place of worship, their idolatrous worship that they had. Now they built them high places and pillars and asherim on every high hill and under every green tree. So here he's saying that back down in Judah, they now have turned to idolatry also. But instead of them worshiping the two golden calves, they now are worshiping the gods of the heathens. They now are building pillars and worshiping the Asherah. Now the Asherah would be the gods of the heathens, and they would let them be represented by a long pole. They just set up a great pole, a tall pole, and they would worship before that. And that's what a pillar was. They set up these pillars and this Asherah, and now Judah has gone into heathen worship, while up in the north, Jeroboam has built his own religion that is up there. It said, and there were also Sodomites in the land, and they did according to all the abominations of the nations which Jehovah drove out before the children of Israel. So now they'd brought the Sodomites back in. The homosexuality was running rapid in the land, and this was the condition that was back down there. Now, look at this from Jehovah's viewpoint. As Jehovah looks down and he looks at the 10 tribes of Israel, what does he see? He sees idolatrous Israel. Idolatrous Israel who are worshiping two golden calves, saying that they're the gods that brought them out of the land of Egypt. And as he looks back down at Jerusalem, down where Rehoboam is, he's looking there now, and they have gone into heathen idolatry down there. So the thing is just turning out to be a mess in this divided kingdom here. Now then, the son of Rehoboam is Abijam, and so it goes ahead to tell us a little bit about him. So what happened when Rehoboam died in 1 Kings 15, 1 through 8? So now it says, in the 18th year of the king of Jeroboam, keep in mind that as you look at this, we're talking about the son of Rehoboam, but here it says Jeroboam, but this is how he dates it here. We'll look at a chart again. They date them off of the other kings there. So it says he reigned 3 years, and in verse 3, and he walked in all the sins of his father, which he had done before him, and his heart was not perfect with Jehovah his God, as the heart of David his father. So he goes ahead, and he now is also engaged in this heathen idolatry. So now we've got the first two kings down in Judah, and they are engaged in heathen idolatry that is down there. However, the next king, the son of this guy we just got through talking about here, his name was Asa, and Asa was a good man. In chapter 15 and in verses 9 through 24, here it says, in the 20th year, and so forth again, it goes there. But let's look in verse 11. And Asa did that which was right in the eyes of Jehovah, as did David his father. And he put away the Sodomites out of the land and removed all the idols that his father had made. And he went ahead and he even removed his mother from the office that she held because she had brought in some idolatry. So Asa is a great guy. Now Asa would be the grandson of Rehoboam, or the great-grandson of David. So as you look, now you have David here, then Solomon came in, and now then as you started out with Solomon, then Rehoboam was his son. He did that which was evil. Then Abijam did that which was evil. And now then, we've got down here Asa, he did that which is good. Now this is kind of an important point, so keep in mind. There was one guy down in Judah who did that which was good. Think about it in this way, because we will see it as you go through and you study this. We can study these years as they go by, and we can do it all at just a flip of a finger. Just, okay, this guy did this guy did this. And we can do this here. 20 years went by, 40 years went by, 17 years went by, and you did this. But now, here you have this country, and it is operating on the basis of you have these evil kings, idolatrous kings, and then all of a sudden, a good king shows up. A real good king, and he does that which is right. Now think, in a period of time, of his lifetime, let's say in 20 years, he could make a lot of changes. He could make changes in there, and the country would apparently start getting better. Then his son is going to do evil, and his son's going to do evil, and then there's going to be a good king come again, and this good king will do what's right, and so he'll pull the country up just a little bit. But here's the picture I want you to get of Judah. Judah was not totally rotten. Judah was 75% rotten, I guess we would put it. Judah had these disobedient, idolatrous kings, but every once in a while, they would have a good king that would come along and restore things back to the way God would have it to be. So over a period of time, Judah is going to kind of hold its own. It's going to kind of keep its head above water. Not so with Israel. Israel, up in the north, it's just going to go deeper and deeper and deeper in debt. In idolatry here. Now, I've got that circle up there, and I want you to notice something here. In the 18th verse of this chapter, it says that the king of Damascus came down, and this good king, Asa, had to take all the treasury out of the temple and give it to him. Now, that's an interesting point. You say, so what? This is going to happen about 3 times down in Judah, where Judah is going to be conquered by different nations. One time Israel will come down. Another time Damascus will come down. And when they come down, they're going to empty the Lord's treasury. It would be like if a country came over to America today, conquered it, and said, now we're taking all of your dollars. We're taking everything and leave us broke, and we start out again. Here's the situation, and this becomes significant again as you're looking at the prophets later on. Now, here you have Judah. Judah is a weak country. People are beating up on it. They're conquering it. And they're taking all of their wealth every time they conquer it. Judah is a poor country. And every once in a while you have a good king, and this good king will come along and clean out all the idolatry and try to get people started back on the right place again. So keep that in mind. That's Judah. But now what happens up in Israel? Well, Israel was a powerhouse. Israel was able to conquer. Israel went down and conquered Judah and took all of its wealth. It was a strong nation, and its kings were evil. It's what happened down there. So now let's go back to Jeroboam's son, Nadab, and we're going to see that he was evil. So you can go to 1 Kings 15:25, and they'll say, now Nadab the son, so it goes on, but in verse 26, and he did that which was evil in the sight of Jehovah, and he made Israel to sin. So now, all of these kings, is the point I want you to see, are going to be evil up there. Now, Nadab's son was Baasha, and he also was evil. But he did destroy the house of Jeroboam. So here it is, he was an evil man, and in chapter 15, verse 34, he did that which was evil, but he destroyed the house there. But in 1 Kings 15:29, when it tells about his life, it says, and he did that which was evil. And he said he didn't depart from the sins of Jeroboam. Now remember, the sins of Jeroboam was a calf worship, worshiping the golden calf. But now he did do something good. He did destroy here all of the household of Jeroboam. Jeroboam's lineage was coming down, and all of a sudden he destroyed it all. So it's a warring nation. It's a fighting nation. It's a nation that has its government turned upside down. It's evil. It's idolatrous. It's rich. It has all of these things that are going for it as you start reading in the history there. Now I want us to notice, and this is the point of going through this, is how all of the kings of Israel were evil. They were all evil, one after the other. Now if I'd stop and we'd take a test right now, I'd say, guess which nation God is going to destroy first? Right? Well, it wouldn't take us long to say, well, Judah is a bad nation, but Israel is much worse. And so obviously, he's going to destroy Israel first. Now keep in mind, God has always worked on a principle, and it's revealed to us back in Genesis chapter 15. When God called Abraham, and he told Abraham what he was going to do to give him this land, he said, but I'm not going to do it for another 430 years. I'm going to take you down into Egypt. Take your people down there and hold you captive. Now we say, why did God do that? Well, there could be a lot of reasons why he did it, but God says, here's the reason I'm not going to give you the land now. He said, in 430 years, I'm going to bring you back, and I'm going to have you to destroy all of these heathens in the land of Canaan. Now he said, I'm not going to do it now because their sin is not yet full. When does God destroy a nation? He destroys a nation when their sin is full. When they no longer have any legitimate right to exist. Now, when does that happen? Well, as you look at a nation, that's too big for a human mind to try to comprehend. Let me compare it to an apple. We've all had an apple. You put it in on the counter and you don't eat it today and you don't eat it tomorrow. You go in and then you find a little spot on it about the size of a dime and it's rotten. Well, you don't throw the apple away because it's not totally rotten yet. You look at it and you might lay it back. I'll eat it tomorrow. And tomorrow it's the size of a quarter. We still don't throw it away. But you don't want your apple, so you put it back. And so you wait, and maybe you come back and maybe half of the apple is rotten. Well, I would take a knife and cut it off. I'd still keep part of that apple. But a couple or 3 days, I go in there, and I think, I believe I'll eat my apple. I pick it up, and it's soft and squeezy all around. And I look at it, and it's brown, and it's rotten. What do? I throw the apple away. And you say, Lowell, didn't you pay big money for that apple? Yeah. Why did you throw the apple away? Because it's the wise thing to do. It's the sensible thing to do. The apple is no longer fit for anything. It's rotten. Now, God sets up these nations. And when does God destroy a nation and throw it away? When its sins are full. And we're going to have to wrestle with this. And we have to wrestle with it in our own life. Now, if this is the only lesson that you ever heard, you've got to go away and you've got to say, what is happening to America? Are we becoming more sinful or less sinful? Are we becoming more corrupt or less corrupt? And everybody that I know of says, oh, we're degenerating. We're becoming more corrupt. So then you say, well, when will God destroy America? I don't have the slightest idea. When America is no longer fit to be used by God. When America is like that apple on my counter. When I look at that apple, and I see in that apple that now then there's only about the size of a quarter that's red, and I could take a bite of that, I just throw it away. The apple is full. There may be some good part in it, but this is a point that we're going to be dealing with as we look at these countries. Now then, let's look at them and see how it fits. Now the kings of Israel continued sinning, and I'm not going to go there tonight. We're going to take our we're going to try to schedule our time here a little better. Now Elah was the next one, and it says he was evil in those verses. Then Zimri, it said, and he was evil. And he didn't depart from the sins of Jeroboam. And the next one was Omri. And says he was evil. And the next was Ahab. And he was the worst of all of them. Oh, Ahab, you remember he buried Jezebel? Jezebel was a Phoenician. And she was a dyed-in-the-wool idolatress. And when she came over to Samaria to live with Ahab as his wife, she brought her prophets with her. She brought some 250 of her heathen prophets, and Jezebel and Ahab, they mixed the religion of God all together. Now what do we have up in Israel? Now we have a nation that is built on worshiping 2 golden calves, plus the king marrying a heathen, and her bringing over her gods and her prophets, and we're mixing them all together and trying to make a nation build on all of this nonsense. Now this is where Elijah comes in. And of course Elijah comes in, he challenges the prophets and he kills 250 of them and so on and so forth like this. But what I'm wanting us to see is, this is the condition of Israel as we're looking at it. Now, an interesting story about how Jehu became king. Now there's a guy by the name of Jehu, and he took the place of Ahab. Now this in 2 Kings 9 and 10, so it's a long story, so let me make it real fast for you. God sent a prophet over to Jehu, and he told him, he said, now I want you to go in, and I want you to anoint this man as king of Israel. And I want you to tell him that his job is to kill everybody associated with Ahab. He is to destroy their family, and he is to destroy all of the Baal worshipers. Now Baal was a heathen god. He was the great heathen god, and I want you to destroy all of those heathen worshipers. And so he comes in, and Jehu is in a room with some of his buddies, And this prophet comes up and he said, could I see you, Jehu? And he said, sure. And he said, well, come in this other room. So they go in the other room, and this prophet pulls out a bottle of oil, pours on his head, and says, thus saith Jehovah, you are now anointed king of Israel. And your job, and then he gave him the job, is to kill all of the house of Ahab, eradicate it from the face of the earth because it's so rotten, trying to get rid of it to give Israel another chance. The way God, to the extent he goes, is just wonderful, trying to give that nation another chance. So destroy Ahab and all of his family, and destroy idolatry, and you become king. So Jehu does that. Jehu was a man that I got to laugh every time I think about the guy. He really enjoyed killing. He went out and he enjoyed killing all these people. He destroyed Ahab's family that he had, destroyed Ahab and Jezebel and killed them. And then he said, okay, now then Ahab has 70 sons. And they were scattered throughout all Israel. So Jehu sends a letter out to all the cities in Israel and said, now, you pick the man you want to be a king. You pick your king out of Ahab's house and get ready because I'm coming after you. Well, they were afraid of Jehu, so they wrote letters back and says, no, we want you to be our king. And he said, okay, if you want me to be your king. Then he gave them a time limit. I think it was 24 hours or something. I want you to send me the heads of every one of those boys, the sons of Ahab. They did it. They rounded them up, they cut off their heads, they put them in a basket, and they brought them to Jehu and said, there's the sons. Now then, Ahab's family is eradicated. All that horrible evil is taken away from Israel. Then Jehu says, now, I'm going to do this for Baal. So Jehu then, he sets out a proclamation throughout the land. And he said, now, I'm going to start worshiping Baal. Now, this is a lie, but this is what he said. I'm going to start worshiping Baal. And I want all of the Baal worshipers, everybody in Israel who worships Baal, I want you to meet at this place on this date, and we're going to have the biggest feast to Baal that you've ever seen. And he said, if there's anybody who worships Baal that doesn't come to this, you're going to get your head cut off. So everybody in the land who worshiped Baal came. He gave them all special clothing to wear. He put them in this great big room. And he said, now, we're going to have the sacrifice to Baal. He goes outside and gets his army, and he said, now, I want you to go in, and I want you to kill every person that's in there, and if any one of you lets any single person out, I'll kill you. So they opened the door, they went in, and they killed every Baal worshiper in the place. Now, think of what's happening up to Israel. Up in Israel, we're rid of that terrible terrible Ahab, and we've got rid of all of the Baal worshipers that are up there. Getting pretty good, isn't it? See, we're eradicating all of this. But it says Jehu didn't depart from the sins of Jeroboam. That's a mighty powerful statement. What are the sins of Jeroboam? The sins of calf worship. So he didn't do that, and it says he then became an evil king. So God is eradicating evil, trying to give Israel every chance that he can possibly give them so that they can do what they should do. So now then, we have that taken care of there, and then you read about the end of Jehu down in chapter 10 and verse 29. Well, that's not our point to be talking about it there tonight. So Jehu is going to be killed. Now, when Jehu is killed, then this was the beginning of the end for Israel. Now, in 2 Kings chapter 10, there, and notice now we're skipping all the way to 2 Kings now, because we've dealt with those other kings just real rapidly there. So go to 2 Kings chapter 10, and in chapters 9 and 10, that's where the story about Jehu that I just got through telling you about. And now then in verse 32, it says, in those days, Jehovah began to cut off from Israel. So in those days, God then says, now we're cutting away Israel. We're starting that decline down at this time. Now this is where Isaiah, Amos, Hosea, and Micah come in. Now Israel is soon going to go into captivity in 722 BC. So now, God, as the last resort, God has done everything He can do to try to get Israel to straighten up. And now it's the last resort. God picks 4 men and sends these 4 men up to Israel to preach to them and tell them what they'd better do. Now, before we go any farther, and before we ever open a book next week, what do you suppose the message is going to be with those 4 men? Okay. If you say, well, what do you think it'll be? You think it's going to be love and kindness? What do you think he's going up there, and what do you think he's going to tell them? What they're going up there and tell them is doom and gloom. They're going up and they're going to say, look, here's what God has done for you, and here's what you are doing to God. And here is what is going to happen to you. God is going to destroy you because. And then they're going to enumerate. They're going to tell these people up there. Isaiah is going up, and he will be in the king's house. Isaiah reminds me somewhat of a man kind of like maybe the Secretary of State, that he goes in and he has access to the king. And he's trying to tell the king what he needs to do. But Amos, Hosea, and Micah, they're 3 other men that go up there. And each one of them has their own personality. Each one of them has their own message that they're going to preach. And they're going up there, and Amos is a country boy. And he's a rough character. And he talks rough. Not vulgar, but he talks rough. Isaiah is a statesman, and his sermons are the sermons of a statesman. But when Micah goes up, or Amos goes up, Amos is going to get right to the point, and he's going to really tell them. Now at the same time, God's going to send Hosea. And Hosea is a different man from Amos. Hosea is a man that, we'll get into the reasons why, but he's had his heart cut so deeply that it's beyond the imagination of man how he could keep his sanity. And God then tells him, now Hosea, now you're ready to go preach. Now then, I want you to go in this disposition or characteristic of absolutely being just, shall I say, gutted with torture. And I want you to go preach to Israel and tell them how much I love them. I want you to go preach and tell them, here's what I did. I loved you so much, and here's what I did for you. And then here's what you did to me. And now then, here's what I'm getting ready to do to you. And so each one of these men will have a message. But their message is all going to be the same, but it'll be in different words in the character of men. Each one of these men will have its own character. Now the interesting thing is, these prophets will describe the political, the social, religious, economic conditions of Israel. They're going to tell about the political condition. They're going to say, here's the way the kings are. Here's the way the courts are. They're going to tell about the social. Here's how you Israelites live. Here's your social life that you've got. Here's your religious life. Here's what the priests do. Here's how you are religiously. And here's your economic conditions. He's going to tell them about all of this. And you and I will be able to learn and we'll be able to see. And here's where we can start scratching our head and say, you know that political thing that he's condemning sounds a whole lot like America. And when you look at the social life that those people had, wow, that could describe America. And you look at it and you say, boy, these are things that hit pretty close to home. And what is God telling that nation? He's telling them, condemning them, and showing them that when you get involved in these things, here's what's going to happen. So then you can scratch your head and you can say, wow, can we learn a lesson? Now, I'm not going to be able to tell you when we get through with here just exactly where America stands. And I want to make haste to say, these men are not prophesying about America. They don't mention America. But what they do is they prophesy and they talk to a nation that finds itself just like we are today. And you can find out what God thinks about people in that particular situation then. So we can see he destroyed them then, and we can see then where we are at the present time. Now then, we turn to 2 Kings 14:21. If you got your Bible, turn there. That's a very important verse. 2 Kings 14:21. So these kings now are going on that we've been talking about that is in here. And all of a sudden, here's where you're going to find the prophets appear. Now, keep in mind that if you open up your Bible and you've tried to find your minor prophets, you'll find them way over at the end of the Old Testament. But what I'm telling you is that's where you find the books. But if you want to find the history, if you want to find the time that they preached, you go back to 2 Kings 14:21. And here in your footnote, if you want to, you can write the names of these 4 men. Here's where those 4 men appeared. Now you look at it, you read it, and you say, well, Lowell, I don't see those men in there. I don't see where it says Amos or Hosea or Isaiah. I don't see their names in there. No, you won't, but I'm going to read it to you. I'm going to show you. Beyond any shadow of a doubt, there's the verse right there. That's it. So you study the history up to this time, and God sends these men at this particular time that is here. Now again, as we built this chart we did last week, here it is, we have these kings, and they're bouncing off of one another and doing in there. And all I'm doing is I'm trying to show up there in Israel, they were all evil, and down here you have one that does right every now and then. So you have all these evil ones, and finally, God's going to take them into captivity. Now down here, these kings are going to go on, they're going to go on, because notice every once in a while, one of these kings will do that which is right. And it's a breath of fresh air. That here it is that you have a period of years that a king is trying to do what's right and telling the people about this. May I suggest this? A king can come into a nation and having all power, he can make rules. And he can say, you're not going to do this, and you're not going to do that, and you're not going to worship these idols, and you're not going to do this. And he can do away with them. And he can destroy all those idols. There's only one thing the king can't do. The king can't change the hearts of the people. What is in the hearts of the people when they are burning their idols? Are they really changing their mind? Or what will happen to them as soon as they get a chance to worship idols again? So we're going to be able to see this. So now then we come down here and finally we come down to Babylonian captivity. And back here, right here, is where we're going to have these prophets that are going to be coming. Now keep in mind, other prophets will be doing other things. Jeremiah will preach over here. Then we're going to have these men going to preach over here. Something totally different. They're going to be talking to Judah. These men are going to go into captivity. They're going to preach over there. Israel already have been destroyed. They're not going to be talking about the same thing as Isaiah and Hosea. Then you have these men that preach after the captivity. They're not going to be talking about the same thing as anybody else. So we got to put our prophets in the right historical way. Right there is where we're going to find that these prophets actually stand that are in here. Now, notice this. The kings of Israel were evil, and they engaged in Baal worship as well as the golden calf. And they were powerful and rich. Down here, the kings of Judah, every once in a while, they did that which was right. And they never did worship the golden calves. However, they worshiped the heathen gods. So both nations are really wicked that's in here. One nation comes to a conclusion then, the other ends up there. But right here, when Jeroboam, now this would be Jeroboam 2, when he's worshiping, when he's living, there's where these men come. And you say, well, okay, show me how you know this. Okay, we look at this, and we're going to see these kingdoms here in both of these nations that are in here, that how Israel was very, very wicked in this, and I've covered this, so we'll get on rapidly here. Now, how do we know when the prophets preached? The same way we know when present-day men preach. It's just the same way. Suppose 100 years from now, people started digging up letters, and it says, Lowell preached in the days of Eisenhower to Obama. And then it says Stephanie's grandpa, be Jim Link, he preached from the days of Kennedy to Reagan. So you'd look and you say, her grandpa, he started after Lowell, and he died before Lowell, but he preached at the same period of time that Lowell was preaching. And then Scott began preaching in the days of Clinton. So you'd look down and say, well, okay, now Lowell was preaching in the days of Clinton because he preached up to Obama's time. He died during Obama's reign. And Scott here, so Lowell and Scott, they both preached together for a period of time. And then it says Jordan began preaching in the days of Obama. And you'd say, well, you know, it looks like Jordan began preaching just about the day after his grandpa died. See? And so you look at it and you could tell, here's where these men came in, if you can find places that says this. Well, that's what we're going to find. We're going to find them. We're going to find in Hosea and Amos, they're going to say, we started during that time. Isaiah and Micah is going to say, we started during that time, down there. There it is. And then over here, Jeremiah is going to tell these different things about when he starts. So these men are going to tell us. Now here's how we know it fits in. So look now in 2 Kings chapter 14, 21 through 23. I put this up here so we can see it. And all the people of Judah took Azariah. Now in brackets, I've put also called Uzziah, because over in 2 Kings it tells us that he was also called that. So now, during Azariah, or Uzziah, and Uzziah is going to be his major name, he was 16 years old, and he made him blah, 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 blah. And in the 15th year of Amaziah, the son of Josiah, king of Judah, Jeroboam began to reign in there. So now here's what we find in 2 Kings 14, 21 through 23. Those little verses right there. Two kings are mentioned. Now look, as these two kings are mentioned that are in here, here we find Amos. Over here, we got Amos 1:1. It said, the words of Amos, who was among the sheep herders of Tekoa, which he saw concerning Israel in the days of Uzziah, king of Judah, and in the days of Jeroboam, son of Joash, king of Israel. When did Amos say he preached? He said, I preached during the time that Uzziah and Jeroboam were king. Now look in your Bibles right now in this verse, in verse 21. And what does that say in verse 21? Who's the king? And in verse 23, who's the king? He says, that's when I did it. So you can write their names down. See? Yeah, Amos started preaching right then. Now then, we have then down here, see, I think I missed one. Okay, down here in Hosea. The word of the Lord came to Hosea, and then it tells that in the days of Uzziah, and then down there, and in the days of Jeroboam. Same two kings. So Hosea said, I started preaching while those two kings were reigning. Amos says, I started preaching while those two kings were reigning. And in 2 Kings 14, 21 through 23 is where those two kings were reigning. So we know that's when they started preaching in there. Now, what about Isaiah? I'm not going to be able to take this off. That's in there. I did something wrong. I got it so it automatically goes off. Isaiah, he names the same thing. So you go to Isaiah 1:1, and he'll tell you when he started. And it's the same period of time. Now then, Micah. We've taken 3 prophets. But now then, Micah. Now we go on. Chapter 15 comes after chapter 14, doesn't it? So right just a little bit later, down there in chapter 15 and in verse 5, we find Jotham is now the ruler. And guess what Micah says? In Micah 1:1, the word of Jehovah that came to Micah, the Moabite, in the days of Jotham. So in the days of Jotham. So right there's where Micah started. Those 4 guys started at the same period of time. So as we look at that same period of time then, and we see all of this as it comes in this way, and we look at the history that we've already studied, we look and we see that these 4 men, they're going up to Israel. And as they go up to Israel, they go up and they're going to cry out and they're going to preach against it. Why? Why not Judah? That's the important thing. God has done everything He can do to get Israel to repent. He has killed the kings. He has cleaned them out of idolatrous worship. He's done everything under the sun. Now He's sending these 4 prophets, and these 4 prophets are God's last call. God's last call to go up and tell them. That's where we'll start in our next lesson, of where God goes and gets Amos and tells Amos to go up, and we'll see what Amos has to say. Then we'll learn it straight from the horse's mouth, as you want to say. What did he say about the condition of Israel and why Israel is going to be destroyed? But should you be here tonight and you know that your life is not right with God, if tonight you need to be washed in the blood of Jesus Christ, either through baptism or confessing your sins, one or the other, would you respond while we stand and sing the first stanza of this song?